Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the line with us, the Chief Prosecuting Attorney for the Hudson Riverkeeper, President of the Waterkeeper Alliance. His new book is Thimerosal at the Science Speak. His website, robertfkennedyjr.com. And you can tweet him at Robert Kennedy Jr. Or Robert Kennedy Jr. Bobby, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's great to have you with us. You wrote an absolutely brilliant piece in Politico titled "Why the Arabs Don't Want Us in Syria," and you started it out by pointing out that your father was murdered by an Arab, and so you've been really paying close attention to this situation. You want to tell us the story?
Well, no, I've spent a lot of time in the Mideast. I do business over there, and my whole life I've had contacts from when I was 14 years old and first visited Egypt. I've had strong contacts in the Arab world, and the disconnect between the way that people in that region view our country and our history in the region and the way that Americans view, following the orthodoxies of power, view our role in the regions. There's an abyss between those two that accounts for many of our worst errors in foreign policy over the past 40 years in the Mideast.
Would you say that it's fair to say that the abyss is wider on the Donald Trump / Republican side than it is on the President Obama Democratic side?
I don't even think that they're in the same dimension, in the same universe.
Right.
I don't think they. I really don't think that they have any clue what. And it may be even like a psychiatric condition.
Right.
That, of some kind of terrible narcissism where you're not able to conceive the other person's point of view.
So what is the Arab point of view about us?
If we had, if somebody was flying drones over our country, why is that okay? And why is it, why is it not okay? And why is it okay for us to do that in other countries? But the disconnect goes way back historically. Most Americans don't know that just to give a little history of Syria. Syria was a French possession French colony prior to World War II. In World War II, the Syrians revolted against the Vichy government of France, which was then controlled by the Nazis, because they, of course, had taken over France and its colonies. They joined the United States fighting against the Nazis, and after the war, they took us at our word that we wanted the Arab nations to become their own sovereigns. And incidentally, that was the official policy of the United States, and we were leading the world on that. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt forced a very reluctant Winston Churchill to sign the Atlantic Charter, and that the Atlantic Charter said that the European countries after World War II would relinquish their colonies and let the Arabs govern Arabia and let the other nations of Africa govern themselves. And this was part of America's own revolutionary anti-colonial tradition. But after the war, Allen Dulles and John Dulles took over the management of our foreign policy during the Eisenhower administration, and they saw the world very differently. They saw it really from a Wall Street perspective, and they saw and they engineered a series of interventions in the Mideast, including overthrowing the first democratically elected government in the history of Iran, the 4,000-year-old history of Persia, elected an idealistic, American-loving president, Mohammad Mossadegh, and they overthrew him in 1953. And many Americans do know about that, though not by far, not the majority of Americans.
Right.
But what most Americans don't know is that 4 years before that, we did our first intervention by overthrowing Shukri al-Kuwaiti, who was the president of Syria, because he refused to approve the Trans-Arabian Pipeline, which was a U.S. project.
Right. This is a large topic, Bobby. We're hitting a break here. Would you like to stick around for there's about a 4-minute break here where our commercial stations are going to commercial break. And then when we come back from that break, I'll bring you back and we'll finish this conversation. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just stick around. We're talking with Robert Kennedy Jr. On the line with us is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby Kennedy, who, in fact, I missed part of your bio here. Also, you can tweet him at Robert Kennedy Jr., at Riverkeeper, at Waterkeeper. Bobby, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom.
So you were saying we just to recap,
we engineered a series of coups in to protect the interests of our oil industry in Syria in the 1950s, and that Syria was a democracy at that point. It became a democracy, a very proud democracy immediately after World War II, and then we repeatedly overthrew the democratically elected presidents of that country in order to protect U.S. oil interests. And in our country, virtually nobody is aware of this history, but the reverberations of those coups affect Syria and U.S. relations with Syria to this day, and I show how in the article. And they color all the relationships, and they color anything that we do in that country. People look at this as a repeat of what we did back in the 50s. So, and Assad really is the Assad family is really a product of those coups and their close relationships with the Soviet Union. Those coups pushed Syria into that relationship with the Soviet Union for self-protection. So, and today the war that we see 1 million refugees, and it's almost as if it happened in a vacuum. But those refugees are the refugees of a pipeline war. A pipeline war. The reason I call it a pipeline war is it really began in 2001. Qatar, which has the largest natural gas reserves in the world, cannot get its gas to market except through ports, and which means it has to liquefy it and ship it, which raises the cost and dramatically reduces the supplies that it can provide to Europe, for example. Right now, Europe gets 30% of its natural gas from Russia, and that represents 80% of Russian supplies. And so it's an existential problem for the Russians if somebody competed with them. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2001, the Kuwaitis proposed to build a multi-billion-dollar pipeline from Kuwait through Jordan, through Saudi Arabia, through Syria to Turkey, which would then give them access to all of the pipelines in Europe. And the Turks would get very rich charging transit fees. So the Turks wanted this. The Turks also don't like the domination from Russia. So Turkey and the Sunni states of Saudi Arabia and Qatar when in 2009, Assad said, I'm not going to allow this pipeline to be built because of the threat it poses to the economy and power of our allies, Russia. Immediately, the European nations who wanted that cheap natural gas and the Sunni nations in the Mideast who wanted that domination of the world economy that gas line would give them began fomenting a Sunni revolt against the essentially Shia government of Bashar Assad. They trained, many of them, Al-Qaeda or Iraqi Sunnis who had been displaced by our war in Iraq and who had been part of the Sunni resistance, what they call Al-Qaeda Iraq, AQI. Those nations, the Sunni nations, began training them and sending them to Syria. And that revolution that we created there, which AQI eventually turned in 2012, changed its name to ISIS. And we've been training these people in Qatar. We've been funding them. We gave them hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons. And the battle, we need to start seeing the battle for what it is, which is a competition between that pipeline and then an alternative pipeline that was proposed by Bashar Assad, which would connect the gas fields of Iran to Turkey, which the Russians approve of because Iran and Syria are their allies. Okay. And you know, when we see 1 million refugees flooding into Europe, and Europe saying, well, we're going to be nice guys and accept a few of these refugees. The refugee problem was really created by the Western nations. And this is very, very clear from the paper record that we have gotten from Snowden's releases and from the Freedom of Information requests that show that the Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA knew that this was going to be the outcome. And
so since 2009, it sounds like it's almost been a proxy war between the United States and Russia over who gets to build the gas pipeline, where and how. This reminds me of the TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline that played such a big role in Afghanistan, too. We've got about 30 seconds, Bobby.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, I don't think it's fair to say that the United States was the driving force, because I think the Obama administration really tried to gear back our assistance to the Sunni revolution that turned into ISIS.
Right.
And, you know, he was vocal about that, but he was getting a lot of hell from Congress and from the press. Why aren't you helping these groups in Syria? And because he knew he had the intelligence. Right. That said from the outset, these people are going to carve out their own caliphate, and they're going to create a radical Islamic state.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Amazing stuff. Robert F. Kennedy. Hang on just a second. The guy always steps on me. I'm sorry. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Chief Prosecuting Attorney for the Hudson Riverkeeper, President of the Waterkeeper Alliance. Bobby, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thanks for having me, Don.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.